Hey Emma,
Yes, Madeline.
what do you call the rather round, jelly bean shaped love triangle that nobody asked for?
I I don't know. What do you call it?
Romance of the Three Fall Guys. Hello, and welcome to Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
I feel like that got a genuine chuckle.
I was thinking, how can something be both jelly bean shaped and a triangle, though?
Oh, you're right. But I was thinking, love triangle, like the popular phrase.
Yeah, I understood it afterwards. I was just confused by what seemed to be a contradiction.
It's a fun little juxtaposition that I can't say crossed my mind at all in the 30 seconds before the show as I concocted the joke.
30 seconds? No wonder it was a hit.
That's not true. I thought about it as I was picking up the microphone, and then we talked for a few seconds before the show. So probably the 3 minutes. But it was only 30 seconds of thought that went into it.
Right.
Regardless of... That's more or less true whenever I come up with the joke, though. Well, folks, thanks for tuning in to Talk This.
I don't say it here.
I couldn't remember if I'd already said it. My brain is melting.
I think you already said it. You already said it.
It's dangerous to podcast alone in any case, folks. It's especially dangerous on Halloween weekend and on fall back weekend.
Oh, is it that weekend?
Yeah, it happened last night, Emma. It's Sunday at noon. So you've already lost it.
Yay, I'm so happy.
So sleepy.
Oh.
Couldn't we have canceled this year? Anyway, folks, thanks for tuning in. This week on the show, we're going to be talking about long-running strategy game series Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
Yes.
And
Still
Battle
running.
Royale, Fall Guys.
Indeed.
So there is no one who enjoys both of these games, right?
There's sort of like this element of lots of players and sort of a chaos happening, right? Maybe not in the gameplay of Three Kingdoms, but certainly in the setting.
I see what you're trying to do here, but I don't think that you are right.
I think our mashup needs to not be just shoving jelly beans into the role of, historical Chinese figures. I think that we need to avoid that. I'm just going to say that right off the bat.
Are you sure?
I'm pretty sure.
That was all that I had, and I thought it would be pretty funny.
Although, Fall Guys loves crossovers, so maybe there's a crossover in the future with the long-running strategy series Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
I can't see what they have to gain from that. The branding opportunity.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's start by talking about long-running strategy series Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
Let's do it.
The more that I read about Romance of the Three Kingdoms, the less that I was sure that it really was the game that we got from Blockbuster.
I don't remember it at all, so...
I just remember getting this game, Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and it being awful. And I could see that being the response that I would have to this game, given what I read about it and watched of it.
I mean, some of the later titles seem to have some sort of relation to, civilization type stuff.
Yes, and that's why I could see this being a game that, we and Dad would have gotten. But I feel like the game that I remember was much more narrative-driven than this. I don't know. Maybe the RPG kind of ones in the 7 and 8 versions, maybe they are more like that.
Yeah, I mean, they do have characters, and they talk to each other. I've seen that, so...
I meant to ask Dad about this week, and then I forgot to until, today, before we were going to record the episode. I was like, it's too late now. So, anyway, Romance of the Three Kingdoms The first one was released in 1985, so it is the 35th anniversary of Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
Was it the
It came out
NES first?
Well, it was really PC.
PC.
But I think so. There were a bunch of them on SNES. It's just a bunch, like, on any kind of old school system. You're going to find several Romance of the Three Kingdoms, because there are a lot of them.
14 of them.
What?
14.
Exactly, yeah. The 14th one came out this year. Not that you would know it, because they're all the same game.
People didn't love the latest one, was my impression. That they, like, took away a lot of features from, like, the ones before and didn't, like, add anything new to it. So, maybe don't buy the latest one if you're interested in getting to this. Maybe buy 13 or something.
Yeah, 14 did not seem to get good reactions from people. Not that this is, like, a widely reviewed series anymore, to be honest.
Sure. But that in that case, it feels like the reviews maybe have more weight because maybe the people reviewing it are actual fans of the series, you know?
That's very true. Anyway, for folks who are not familiar with long-running strategy, turn-based sort of RPG
I don't think we need to keep introducing it that way. I think we've hit the point.
Romance of the Three Kingdoms. It's from Koei Tecmo. And as we said, they've been releasing a lot of them. I guess when it's 14, not that there's also not a bunch of, like, spin-off games, but 14 over the course of 35 years, I guess, is not really, like, an annual game.
No.
But for a while in the PS2 generation, it was a game where they released a new one every year. And it's based on the Chinese kind of classic historical novel, Romance of the Three Kingdoms. It's also based on the Chinese history Records of the Three Kingdoms, which is what it's actually called in Japan and China.
It feels a little bit redundant to say that, because I'm pretty sure Romance of the Three Kingdoms is based on Records of the Three Kingdoms.
It is, but I make that point because I was reading about Total War Three Kingdoms, which also came out last year, that has 2 modes, which I thought was pretty cool in reading about it, where you could play it as Records of the Three Kingdoms or Romance of the Three Kingdoms, and in Romance the kings have, like, supernatural powers and stuff, and in Records they don't.
Interesting.
Anyway, right? Anyway, if you're a Western audience listening to this, you would be forgiven for, like, knowing the phrase Romance of the Three Kingdoms, but not really knowing too much about it. But it's this very kind of storied, almost history mythological.
I saw it compared to, like, for a Western reference to, like, the Odyssey, for instance, except longer.
And super familiar to Eastern audiences, particularly in China, although obviously there's a strong audience for this in Japan as well, given that Koei Tecmo is a Japanese studio.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that in some ways is geared at a Chinese audience in a certain way, because all the reviews I saw were like, for like Chinese audiences, this is like Shakespeare, right? Like everybody knows these like big characters, and like part of the fun over there is like if we had an RPG with like a Hamlet.
Yeah. I skimmed through the summaries of like the first 70 chapters, I think. There's like a paragraph for each chapter. I just skimmed over it. It's a lot of fighting, a lot of people killing each other, a lot of war happening. But in one of the chapters, pretty early on, actually, I was just skimming through it, and it was like, oh, he kills him, oh, there's war, and then it's, and I'm sorry for butchering Chinese pronunciation in advance, but General Xiao Hao Dun is struck in the eye by an arrow, and so he plucks out the wounded eye and eats it in the middle of the battle, striking terror into his enemies. That's the chapter summary.
Yakuza 0.
So that's my highlight from skimming through summaries of the first 70 chapters.
I read a summary that was like the emperor, like one of the like warlords generals like comes to visit someone and he doesn't have anything to feed him, so he cooks his wife, and the general is pleased.
That's pretty good too. That's good.
So there's wild stuff, and there's a lot of characters, and it's the whole idea, right, is it's this three kingdom period at the end of the Han Dynasty, where these three different kind of states within China are trying to take control. And obviously the heads of those three states are like the very famous figures, but there's all these games. With every game, there's like more and more and more and more characters that they add in. And so this most recent one has like 1,000 different characters that you can make part of your army, and
there's also custom. Some of the more recent ones you can make custom characters as well.
That too. Romance of the Three Kingdoms is probably most significant for... I didn't realize this, but Dynasty Warriors is a spin-off of Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
Yeah, I think we actually probably mentioned this in our Dynasty Warriors episode, actually.
No doubt we did. And I did realize it at one point, but not now. I can't even remember if I introduced the show at the beginning, so...
Dynasty Warriors has certainly become the more popular son, I guess, to the Romance of the Three Kingdoms series. Nobody's making Hyrule of the Three Kingdoms.
That'd be kind of dope, though. Like, I'll be honest, right? Like, if somebody would make this with characters that I know and that I feel the attachment to that the Chinese audience feels towards these characters, maybe I could be more into this.
Just make me Fire Emblem Three Kingdoms.
See, that's what I sort of thought this was going to be at first. When I was reading about it, and I was like, oh, it's a turn-based RPG war game. I was like, why do I have this vivid memory of thinking this game was the worst from age 7 or age 8 or whatever. And then I actually watched somebody playing. I had gotten into my head that I was pretty sure we played 7. Like, something about 7's box art looked familiar.
Sure.
And so I was watching, a double speed, somebody's Let's Play with no commentary of Romance of the Three Kingdoms 7. And the whole game is menuing. It's just menus. That's the game. Because basically what you do is... So in some games, you can, choose if you're a king or you're a peasant or you're a warlord or whatever. Although in many games, and the amount of control and the way you do this varies depending on the game, because there's 14 of them and they have to shake it up somehow. But basically, you get all sorts of officers on your side, then you get to send them to do things, and it affects various rankings about your towns that you control, and then over time, you take over China, hopefully, if you're good at the game. And mostly you do that with a lot of menus.
See, but how is that, significantly different from something like Civilization? Isn't Civilization at its core just a lot of menus?
I know. I was trying to figure out what about this felt worse to me than Civilization. And
sure, but you have to think back to, old Civilization. You can't compare 7 to the most recent Civilization.
That's fair. Although I did watch the launch trailer for 14, which came out in the East in January, but didn't get an English version until spring. I was watching that, and I can't say that too much about the visuals or anything about it seemed that different from 7.
Fair.
To be honest. Yeah, I feel like in Civilization, there's more visuals. There's a little bit more of a visual element to it. And just something about this felt so dense. I know Civilization is a lot of menus, but you can get away with playing it without it being a menu city if you're not intense about it. And this just felt like it was nothing but text events. Just over and over and over. It was I sent officer to talk to this guy, and he said, oh, would you repair my fence? And I repaired the fence, and the safety rating went up, and then yada yada, and yada yada.
Hey, good on him for repairing his fence, though.
You're right.
That's nice.
I know. It's a game for somebody who wants to be a manager at work. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're very into the casual, I guess, tactics scene, right?
Yes.
We like our casual tactics games. And I think the farther you get into tactics games, the more it, like, sort of leans into that sort of appeal, right? Of being able to manage lots of things and keep track of various things and all of that.
And what I find the most interesting or hard to parse about this series, and it made me think of it in the context of something like Madden or FIFA or something like that, to be honest, it's not even like, so there's 14 of these, right? And so there's a little bit of variation in terms of what the scenarios are. Like in each game you have like 6 different scenarios, and you can jump in basically at different parts of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms story, more or less. And sometimes some of them have more than that, and a lot of them have power packs or whatever it was called back in like like the 90s, where you would add more scenarios and that kind of thing and more characters. But for the most part, the scenarios are the same, which makes sense, right? Like, you want to do the good parts of the book. You don't want to, like, you want to make sure you get the guy eating the eyeball parts, and not, like, the boring parts. But it's hard for me to understand that. And I recognize Civilization is basically the same thing of, you know, you mostly play the same, like, it's the same civilizations. But this in particular was like, this is like I'm like playing some kind of historical fan fiction game over and over and over again, but it's the same story over and over and over again.
I guess at that point it becomes about mastery, right?
Right. And theoretically, with each new release, they tweak the mechanics a little bit. But that's why it made me think, like, weirdly, like, this feels a game that's more akin to something like FIFA or any of these, like, or even Call of Duty in some ways, although actually not like Call of Duty. It'd be like if Call of Duty just released, but it was like the same place over and over again. It's just slightly different mechanics.
Yeah. Hey, they do put historical figures in there, so...
Oh boy.
I'm still haunted by Call of Duty Reagan.
I know.
He's so scary looking.
Anyway, that I just found particularly interesting, that they've somehow, because, like, these games have sold 8 million copies. Like, they certainly aren't, like, famous games in the West or anything like that in any way, but they're games that sell.
Yeah, see, actually, like, I guess it just, like, it's very niche, so I don't really know how impressive that is for its genre and stuff, but that's not a lot of copies for 14 games, it doesn't feel like.
I guess that's true. I more mean to say, they've been making these games for 35 years, and they seem to be continuing to make these games.
Sure, yeah, I'm sure they at least give them enough profit to make the next one.
Yeah.
But they are not, I do not think it would be fair to say that these are wildly successful titles.
Oh, I don't mean to say that. I just mean to say, for a game that seems to have very little mass appeal, it's surprising to me that there's enough of an audience that they've continued to make it quietly forever. And I guess that maybe, I'd be interested to see how much of that comes down to, are these games, like, quite popular in China?
Are they allowed in China?
They are allowed in China, because there was some interview with one of the devs who was talking about, here it is. He says, "We feel that gamers in the East, due to their deep knowledge of the Romance of the Three Kingdoms, tend to critique us more on characters or our interpretation of the story. Whereas in the West, people are less familiar with the time period or with the novel. They tend to view it as a pure strategy game, and their comments really reflect that."
That makes sense.
I found that kind of interesting. I mean, it makes total sense, but it's not something I would have thought of at all. That, of course, gamers in China are going to be like, oh, like, you did, like, the Devious General totally wrong. Whereas here it's like, okay, like, but I didn't like that menu.
Yeah, they're really, in China, they're all, like, about the adaptational choices.
That they are.
Like,
which maybe makes...
game's not as good as the book.
But I could see, I don't know. Like, there are a lot of stories about, like, World War II or whatever that get released for Western audiences.
Yeah.
So I guess this is...
No, I was thinking
similar.
a little bit about, I mean, again, it's like Japanese games, but like there's a bunch of games, like JRPGs that are like somewhat, like Jeanne d'Arc will show up in an inordinate amount of games. Or like, you know, sort of like general, like medieval setting when there's all like the wars going on. So it's just that, except from China.
It's weird. I had never really put together that these were... Well, I'd never really realized that they were the same thing over and over, to be honest. Or really put together that Romance of the Three Kingdoms was actually based on Romance of the Three Kingdoms. I really assumed this was like a Final Fantasy kind of deal. I did. I was like, okay, Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Yeah, that's like a fun title. And probably they're like doing this in different places.
Nope.
And it's interesting to me that they haven't really.
Nope. Same Three Kingdoms. Doing their capital R romance.
Yeah. But yeah, just not the kind of game that I feel like I would have the patience to be into.
Sure. Yeah. That's
I
fair.
understand the appeal, sort of, but there's just not enough. I definitely understand the appeal if the characters are, you already have a pre-existing attachment to the characters, because that feels like that would do a lot of work here, when most of what you're doing is like micromanaging your army. So yeah. The Three Kingdoms game that came out last year is from a Western studio, actually. The other one, Total War, Three Kingdoms.
Oh yeah. Total War is a series.
Well, yeah.
They set theirs in different places.
Yes, I know that. Like the next one is like Troy. But in some ways that seemed to get better reviews. If only because their brand of strategy RPG seems a little bit more accessible.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to see if this kind of, like, as game companies start to think more and more about the Chinese audience, right?
Yep.
Whether stories like this become more and more part of the kind of Western... You know, because like we talked on like the second episode of the podcast when we talked about God of War, about how like everything is Greek. Like Greek mythology is like our version of Romance of the Three Kingdoms, I guess.
That's fair, yeah. I mean, you know, China has its own mythology too. But
of course it does. I don't mean to say that in terms of like overall cultural impact,
yes,
they're equivalent, but I do mean to say in terms of video game adaptation material, that like the only thing Western that I can think of as like sort of comparable in terms of it's got a mythological and not in the broad everything's a myth sense that I have been known to take, but it like truly mythological sense, right? While also having like some tiny historical basis. Feels like Greek myths in games fill that same niche.
That's fair, yeah.
But I would be interested to see if more Chinese stuff takes hold in Western studios. 'Cause maybe one day there's money there.
Maybe.
Maybe one day Tencent owns all the studios anyway.
Maybe.
A lot of possibilities.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, big apologies to Romance of the Three Kingdoms for it being like the game that I think of when I think of games that I don't like, even though I didn't remember anything about it until
yeah, you should really let it go. Maybe this is a sign that you should let
I know, this really is
the
one where
memory
I'm
go.
like, you know what? This doesn't seem like what I remembered. I'm wondering if what I really am remembering is the Final Fantasy game that you were talking about.
Final Fantasy X? Yeah, I remember getting stuck like near the beginning of Final Fantasy X.
I'm wondering if I've somehow combined those in my mind, and like this was not a good game either, but I feel like I've mashed them together.
I've heard Final Fantasy X is good. I think we maybe played like the first hour of Final Fantasy X.
I have it now. I think I have 10 and 10-2 for the Switch, so I'll report back.
Okay.
I hope I haven't accidentally purchased the game that I associated with Romance of the Three Kingdoms forever, and... Anyway. Yes, apologies to Romance of the Three Kingdoms for the decades of hate that I've held for you. You don't seem like my cup of tea exactly, but only because I like my strategy games, you know, more like Civilization or, what's the big one right now that I want to play, but thank goodness my computer can't play it.
Crusader Kings?
Or Crusader Kings, or, you know, Fire Emblem. I'll stick to those.
Sounds good.
Well, are you ready to talk Fall Guys Ultimate Knockout?
I am very ready.
Now for something completely different.
Indeed.
So we've talked about Fall Guys on the show a fair bit, just from our what we've been playing the past 6 weeks, the past couple of times, I think. But it's a 2020 Battle Royale game from Mediatonic and published by Devolver Digital for PS4 and PC.
Indeed.
And as I'll say every time we talk about Fall Guys, Emma and I played it for the first time at PAX East.
We did. We were bad.
We were bad. Well, you were better than me. And as I was looking at it, I was wondering if the guy who talked to us was like the lead designer. Because I feel like I remember him being British. And the guys
I'm sure it seemed like the actual team was there, not just volunteers. Yeah. So I'm sure he was somebody. I don't think they have or at least when they were making it, they've expanded their team now, I think. But they did not have a very large team. Was my impression.
Yes, that's correct. It ultimately grew to like 30 people as they were making it, and I'm sure it's much larger now. But,
yes.
But yeah, I was like watching some footage from PAX East and like some interviews, and I was like, oh, like maybe that was the guy that talked to us. And
we just embarrassed ourselves.
Yeah, we did just
our poor
fully
fall
embarrass
guying.
ourselves. Or in bad fall.
Yes.
Anyway, Fall Guys, if you have PS Plus, you probably got it in August.
Yeah.
With everybody else. But it's like a game literally inspired by games like game shows like Wipeout and other British ones that I hadn't heard of, but they said over and over. Somebody's Castle, Takeshi's Castle.
Takeshi's Castle is like a weird one in that I think it's a Japanese show, but then they would air it in Britain with like British people commenting over it.
Incredible.
I know, it feels a little sketched nowadays, but it was a cool thing, I guess, when it came out.
It seemed really influential to this dev team because they mentioned it in every interview like 20 times. There's also one that they mentioned that they showed footage from called It's a Knockout, where it's like an 80s game show where like all of them have to wear like big costumes when they do obstacle courses. And I was like, that is Fall Guys, isn't it?
Pretty much.
So in this game, you're one of 60 jelly bean costume dudes with butts.
They don't really particularly have butts.
They talked a lot in the interviews about how like it was a great design decision to give them like a little bit of a butt so they wobble.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, you play as one of these 60 jelly bean Fall Guys, and you compete in game show type obstacle courses and team games to vie for the crown. Emma and I have one crown between us, unless she has
No, I have not won anymore since then.
But it's a good opportunity to plug that blog again, because I think it's really funny. Emma sent me those questions back, and I read them while I was working, and on like a meeting, and I shouldn't have. So it's a good opportunity to be like, check out the blog. Don't worry, I'll remind you again at the end of the show. One of the original names for Fall Guys was Stumble Chums.
Yes, I knew that.
Which I really feel like is a missed opportunity.
No, Fall Guys is catchier. Stumble Chums doesn't roll off the tongue, you know?
You're absolutely right, although I do love the assonance of it, the Stumble Chums. But it seems like the community management team has kind of adopted Stumble Chums as their moniker now. So, lives on. But what a British name.
Yeah,
you know?
That's true.
Be like, what are you going to call your game? At first it was like,
I mean, just the Chums
Gauntlet
part.
or something. Yeah.
Just the Chums part. It's very British.
I don't even know where to start with talking about Fall Guys.
It has since fallen from its title as like the new hot thing, but like it very much followed the model of like Rocket League in the way it launched on PlayStation Plus, which was that they managed to get a whole ton of players just off of that from the get-go, which really I think maybe overwhelmed them a little bit.
Yeah.
But they got back on their feet relatively fast for how small they are.
Yeah, I was going to say almost to their detriment. I mean, certainly not to their detriment. Like, it's obviously better to have more players. But this game was, like, impossible to play for the first 4 or 5 days, more or less. I watched a fair bit of interviewing with the team and sort of how they made the game and came up with the game that I thought was really kind of interesting. Like, of course, it was, like, a very small team at first, and also... like, they were not, like, this was, like, a random pitch that somebody made up, basically, as a result of talking about some other game. And they were immediately like, this is going to be a hit. Like, let's do this. It was pretty good. The pitch was pretty, I looked at it, the one-pager. And I was like, yeah, that's pretty catchy pitch right there. And not just because I love Wipeout. But kind of because I love Wipeout. But also I liked reading a little bit about, so like obviously they had to craft the minigames, and there were a lot that they started making and didn't make. They talked about a Minesweeper level, which they were all like, this was not fun, so
does not sound
we didn't
fun.
keep it. It's kind of like the Path one, except there were bombs that would blow you one way or another. Anyway.
I know what Minesweeper is, Mel.
I know, but it's not like it's a little bit different than Minesweeper. Like when they said Minesweeper level, I was like, do you have to find the bombs? Like, is it really like Minesweeper? But no, it was more like the Pathways one, except with bombs, seemingly. And I hate the Pathways one, so this would have been a bad game for me. But they talked about kind of their, like, eventually they came up with some, like, pillars of the design of things that had to be true for it even to be considered. Of it being 50-50 chaos and skill, and that the level had to be different every time. And also that the game modes needed to be able to be explained in 3 words. It was interesting.
What is this one for seesaws? Is it just seesaws?
Seesaw run.
Yeah.
Is seesaw 1 word or 2? That's the trick.
Yeah.
Seesaws,
I mean, I don't think you need
boing.
anything. I really think, like, the description for seesaws could just be seesaws.
Seesaws.
And you got it. That's under 3 words, and it makes sense. It carries your point across.
Yeah. It does. I also really like the way that they described the physiques of the Fall Guys, just the attitude of the Fall Guys. One of the artists described them as unathletic but ambitious.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Like, and the other one said, the least helpful shape for what you're going to make them do. It's like, you know what? That's accurate.
I was not as much a fan of their inside of the Fall Guy concept art.
They re-upped it for Halloween, too.
I don't love it. I didn't love it very much.
The Fall Guys do have somewhat scary skeletons.
They do.
Fortunately, they don't really, by the way, to be clear. It's not modeled in. Boundary break checked.
I'd be really impressed if they modeled that in. That seems like a lot of effort for nothing.
Rigging up the skeleton.
Yeah.
They should do it.
Yeah, it seems like a good way to spend their resources.
Actually, one thing I did learn, so there's a Boundary Break episode, which if you're not familiar with it, is a YouTube show where, like, basically he takes the camera around and shows you things
takes
that
the
you can't
camera
normally.
Places you wouldn't normally be able to see. He always says the same thing every time. I don't remember
have it
specifically
memorized,
what it
but
is either.
Emma does. But for this one, he actually, like, he was able to ask some questions to the actual developers. And it sounds like Big Yeetus, which is this, that's a thing they've now added to the game of this, like, random hammer that will yeet you, if you're successful about it. But it sounds like Big Yeetus was maybe originally, like, an anti-bug mechanic. Because one of the guys who worked on it was saying, like, because of the way the engine works, or something works, there has to be, like, a moving piece in every level, basically. But in something like Hexagon, which is just tiles that disappear, there's nothing that moves. So he was like, so if you move the camera back on a level like that, like, you might spot, like, a rotating hammer, like, way out there somewhere, so that there's something moving.
Maybe someone was like, we got it loaded in anyway, so...
It, you know?
Why not bring it out sometimes?
Move it in. But Fall Guys, I feel like, is also a really interesting example of a game that somehow figured out how to run its social media successfully.
I go back and forth on its social media.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Just depending on who it's decided to interact with that day, I guess.
That's fair. I won't say that every joke or everything that they do on that social media thing lands for me, but it is interesting, and I'll be interested to see how other games are not able to, like, replicate this. But they certainly have a unique social media voice, and a voice that in many ways matches the feel of the game.
Sure, yeah.
And that, you know, generated, seemingly anyway, a lot of organic reach, just because their tweets were so dumb, basically.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I can't think of another game, at least that's on my radar, that has that kind of a Twitter presence that was quite as successful.
I mean, it's so easy to backfire it, right?
What do you mean?
Like when you're responding to your fans, which seems to be sort of a key element. It's so easy to make a joke that you didn't think about at all.
Yeah.
And have that come back at you, I guess.
Yeah.
Or even a joke you did think about, and then either you are deservedly or undeservedly shamed for it.
Oof. No, it's risky, and in many ways, like, the thing that it feels most modeled on is something which, you know, everyone is much more sour on than they were, I feel like, when this was first a big thing. But it feels modeled on something like the Wendy's Twitter, back when the Wendy's Twitter was, like, a cool and funny thing. Not that it was ever really cool. Like, not that it's really any different now, to be honest, in terms of what it's doing. But back when everyone thought that was, like, a cool and funny thing, as opposed to a, like, corporate terror thing.
I like Arby's, like, a weird video game.
I know. I do, too.
Tweets more.
What's up with Arby's?
They just, like, make, like, food things for every release.
Which, to be honest, that's also really in line with, like, the Fall Guys strategy, too, I feel like, too. Of, like, oh, you like this? Like, here it is. It's a hat now.
Yeah.
I feel like I've asked you this before, maybe on an episode where we talked about playing it for the first time, but do you have any wish list character costumes?
You definitely have asked this before, yes.
Okay. Do you think we'll get one for Melody of Memory?
No.
For Nier?
Maybe. They've talked about it on social media.
I did not like that social media exchange.
Really?
I loved it, but I did not like it.
I liked it when it was the robot.
The bot. The fake bot.
Yeah. I thought that was good.
I did not like that Yoko Taro acknowledged the Fall Guys bot as his son. In binary.
That's how they've got to communicate that way.
I know, but I don't know what he has wrought. This is the beginning of Nier, as how Nier begins.
I'm just waiting for, like, there to be instead of Nier coming into Fall Guys, the new Nier Replicant is going to have Fall Guys in it.
I don't like that. You could, too. You could definitely make, like, a robot creature that was Fall Guy shaped in Nier, and it would have it say, I don't know, grab.
Yeah.
Grab.
Yeah.
Grab.
Yep. You could definitely do that.
I would hate that. What changes do you want to see in Fall Guys?
I mean, I don't really have any, to be honest. I don't really have any complaints about the game.
I do. Couch co-op.
I mean, I understand why that's not... I don't know if there are any games where you can play couch co-op and online at the same time.
I don't either.
I don't know if there's, like, some sort of real technical hurdle to doing that. Just because I feel like if it were somewhat feasible, games would do it. You know? And you can't just have couch co-op for Fall Guys. You'd have to design, like, a whole new game for that.
Right. No, of course. That's not what I meant. I didn't mean switch it to couch co-op.
Yeah.
That would be bad. But I would like couch co-op, though.
Yeah, it just seems like maybe that's something that's not easily technically possible for games. Because I feel like we would have seen it by now.
Okay, well, why are we wasting our time with realistic graphics? Give the people what they want.
Uh-huh.
Who cares about their pores?
Uh-huh. Yes, less pores on the Fall Guys, please.
Just don't even speak that into the universe. I don't want to know how they sweat. And now they're going to tell me.
They're listening. They're like, ooh, how they sweat. Good idea.
They will. You'll tweet this, and the guy who runs the Twitter will listen to the show, and he'll be like, "Oh, how they sweat. Let's get some concept art for this ASAP."
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, the obvious change that they've been teasing forever, and I don't understand why this is so hard to implement, is that when you finish a level or die and you're playing with a friend, it should go to your friend.
Yeah.
Clearly, I don't understand anything about how games work, because it doesn't feel like that should be that hard.
I mean, these are all technical things that I also don't understand how it works, but I assume
implying
that they are hard.
I wasn't implying that you would understand, to be clear. I don't think you're that intelligent, but I'm just kidding.
No, I have enough knowledge to assume that there's probably some sort of irritating thing that makes it hard. I just wouldn't know what that is.
I guess so. I hear ya. And then I would also so before Wipeout was canceled, there were Wipeout 5Ks. And Clickbait Boyfriend and I did one, 5 years ago. And I know that the Fall Guys team, that they, as part of their development process, went to some obstacle courses and ran around on them. Where's my real life Fall Guys?
You know, maybe wait for the plague to pass and it will come to be.
Put me in the big bubble suit.
But then you have to disinfect all the big bubble suits in between, you know?
Okay. So do that.
It's hard. That's a lot of work, you know?
I'll pay for it. I'm not expecting this to be free. I'm just saying, the Fall Guys are big enough that you kind of have to stay 6 feet apart no matter what. Right? Given that how tall are they? The Fall Guys are 6'5" or something.
They're taller than Kiryu.
That's what I was remembering, but yeah. I don't want every one of my references to be Yakuza. Kiryu would not like Fall Guys. I don't think.
They're a very good, promising side quest material though. The Fall Guys obstacle course.
You know what? If Fall Guys did a Yakuza costume pack, that would be tempting for me.
Sure. I think it'd be more fun if Kiryu has to put on the big Fall Guy suit and run an obstacle course. But that's just me.
You can't tell me that's not a side quest in these games.
I'm sure there's something like that.
You can't tell me Kiryu is on a Japanese game show isn't. But you know what? That would be a meme that got showed around, though, if that was a thing, though. So maybe not. But
People tend to prioritize 0 in their memes and GIFs and stuff, so maybe it's in one of the later ones that people don't use as much. That's not totally true. There's the one of him giving the thumbs up that's like from 6, I think, but...
Right, and the heart one from 2.
Yeah.
I think all games should have a Japanese game show mode. Maybe. So speaking of which, is it time to mash?
I guess so. I guess it is time to mash.
This truly is the monster mash this week, unfortunately.
It's Three Kingdoms, except it's a battle royale, except instead of fighting,
oh no,
you're going through like a historically themed obstacle course. There you go.
Give me some level design for that.
I don't know enough about Romance of the Three Kingdoms to... Can you get past the guy eating his eyeball without being stricken with fear? I know, I'd have to do some research into actually reading the book in order to give you some level design for that, unfortunately.
I do think that a Three Kingdoms battle royale, like more traditional battle royale game would probably do very well in China, right?
Probably, yeah.
Surely that's got to already exist, right?
I don't know. I looked, there's a page of, like, video games based on the Three Kingdoms on Wikipedia, and I think they were all strategy games, from what I could tell. So... That's
a missed opportunity, I gotta say it. That's a cash cow that I'm just handing out to whoever's listening. Serious. Same thing with a Greek mythology battle royale. More mythological battle royales feel like they gotta be coming.
Sure, yeah.
Somebody is playing Hades and being like, but wouldn't this be fun with microtransactions?
I'm sure somebody is, you're right.
Apparently it's me. Okay. I don't like that idea. I'm sorry. That's not a compelling pitch that you've given me.
Okay, well...
It's got to be better than the Fall Guys are the characters in Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
That's what I said at the beginning. Can't be that.
I know, but it's gotta... If you're gonna say it can't be that, it's gotta be better than that.
You are part of the noble Fall Guys kingdom.
Okay.
And...
We'll change the name. Chums.
the Stumble Chums kingdom. And one day you're invaded by a neighboring kingdom made up of little jelly bean creatures.
Okay.
And you have to sort of fight them off through the combination of violence and diplomacy.
I thought you said that you couldn't do a game that was just the Fall Guys.
But it's not. It's not like I'm dressing up the Fall Guys like the figures in Romance of the Three Kingdoms. I'm taking the idea of warring kingdoms and bringing in some strange little boppity creatures that you have to deal with.
What's the gameplay?
Like I said, there's a mixture of violence and diplomacy, where you have to sort of either send the little creatures flying, or satisfy them with like apples.
These games tonally just do not mix. That's the problem. It's like you can create a game that's like
it's like Rabbids. That's like the Rabbids series.
It is kind of like the Rabbids series, isn't it? That feels like it loses something really important about Romance of the Three Kingdoms, but that is pretty much what it is. That's the problem I'm having, because you can create a game that's like, okay, it's a mix of like strategy elements and then like real-time mini games, right? But you can't really create a game that has the irreverence of Fall Guys and the, like, total sincerity, I feel like, of Romance of the Three Kingdoms.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to mix tones. Maybe you can mix tones like that, but it's hard.
I would call Fall Guys a sincere game.
You're right. They are ambitious.
Yes.
Unathletic, but ambitious.
They go with determination to their goals. You know? There's something
You're
noble
right.
about them.
The Fall Guys, if the Fall Guys wanted something from life that wasn't to win the crown.
Yeah.
Oh. I found it. I found the kernel.
There's also the eternal rivalry of red, blue, and yellow.
Right. Sometimes there's green. Who cares about
Who
green?
cares? They're only in one game. Doesn't matter.
You're right. Okay. I think there's something with the red, blue, and yellow rivalry and the crowns. And you could definitely take some of the medieval new games from season 2.
Sure.
Like wall guys could be pretty much taken as is as a mini game. So you're just 3 really unathletic armies.
Sure.
Right?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. There's something there. Gotta let it percolate.
Sure. You can do that. You let it percolate.
Alternately, Fall Guys VR.
Where's the VR coming from?
Nowhere. Just a game pitch.
Just a general one? Okay. I'll expect 1-pagers on both of those on Monday. How about that?
Excellent. Great. I have 1 less hour today, but sure. Well, folks, this has been another highly successful episode of Talk This.
It's dangerous to podcast alone.
Emma's so bored she can't even...
You know what? I've got 1 less hour. I'm already waking up early these days. For a particular reason.
When does that reason make its debut on the show?
I mean, I'm sure there will be some noise left over from that reason. Because she has been jingling her collar a little bit. And, yep.
What kind of creature does Emma have? Sound off on our social media. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Talk This Podcast. So feel free to, hit us up with some thoughts about the show. Do you want to defend Romance of the Three Kingdoms from the years of slander that I gave to it? Do you have a favorite Fall Guys level? And why is it not the fruit one? Any of them with fruit?
Do you have a favorite Romance of the Three Kingdoms character?
Level? Do you have a favorite scenario from Romance of the Three Kingdoms? And do you have thoughts on how you might adapt it into a level for Fall Guys Ultimate Knockout?
How would you strike fear into your enemies? Would you eat your eyeball?
You've really latched on to that. I'm sure that's not a major story.
I know. It was very striking, okay? I was really skimming it, okay? I was getting the basic gist. And then I suddenly saw eats his own eyeball. And I had to stop.
Oh boy. What are your thoughts? If you have thoughts on any of that or anything else about the show, leave them on our social media. You should also check out our website, www.talkthispodcast.com, where you can read all about the show, check out the games that are in the hat that Emma's about to pull our next fortnight's games from, and also read our blog, where you can see long-running series Clickbait Boyfriend, and Split Screen, where Emma and I are watching My Hero Academia and Coffee Prince, and various other and sundry blogs sprinkled in there periodically. It's good stuff. Finally, and I mentioned the various other sundry blogs. You should definitely check out Emma's Fall Guys blog about her win on Fall Guys. Duh. Anyway, the last but not least is that you should subscribe to the show. We're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, Pandora Podcasts online and on the app, Overcast, Pocket Cast, anywhere you can find podcasts, you can find Talk This. Next week's a side quest. It's Emma's choice.
Yes. I will think of something.
That she will. We'll talk about something games. But in 2 weeks, Emma, what are we going to be talking about on our next main edition?
For our old game, we will be talking about Chrono Cross.
Dope.
And for our new game, we'll be talking about The Outer Worlds.
Okay, worlds.
Worlds. We've already done Wilds.
Don't research the wrong game,
We
Madelyn.
already did it. We're doing Worlds.
That doesn't help me.
Worlds.
Outer Worlds.
Yes.
Awesome. Chrono Cross Outer Worlds.
The Outer Worlds, even.
You're right. It's Outer Wilds with no the, isn't
Yes.
it? Oh boy. This is gonna be a nightmare episode for me, folks, so you'll want to tune in. So that'll be in 2 weeks. Next week's the side quest. And that's it for our show.
Feel
Emma?
free. I was gonna say, Madeline. Feel free to sign us off.
Dang it, you beat me to it. Okay. I hope that this week, as the autumn chill sweeps the air, that you too become a fall guy. Should have used that at the beginning.